Hey, good morning, everybody. Meteorologist Jim Dickey back here with another edition of Tropics Talk, focusing in now on Tropical Storm Ian. This is the 8 o'clock advisory from the Hurricane Center. Winds 45 miles per hour, moving west-southwest at 15 miles per hour. Let me clarify. This is 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. I want you to be sure you're getting the latest information from the National Hurricane Center here going forward. So if you're watching this after 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, there's going to be new data for you to look at. So be sure you're checking in with the Hurricane Center frequently, especially if you're watching from Florida, to make sure you are up to date on the latest from Ian. But with that in mind, let's go through what is the latest as of this recording here right now. Ian sitting about 1,000 miles off to the south and east of Florida. A little bit ragged on the satellite presentation as we go back here. Tough to pick out from this image alone where the center of Ian is. And you're sort of seeing again that thunderstorm activity looking to sort of break apart a little bit. If this were on the verge of becoming a hurricane, what you'd be seeing at this point in time, as I zoom in, and I'll do a little bit of illustration here for you. Oops. There's the radar. We go back. There you go. You would be seeing more of a concentric circle around where the center is, which looks to be right about here at this point in time. But you're, if anything, seeing things breaking apart a little bit. Now, of note, too, see sort of the fluffy appearance on the edge? That's also a sign that we're starting to get some upper-level venting, some upper-level outflow, a sign of sort of an intensifying hurricane, or tropical storm, rather. So what I'll be looking for in the near term, is this able to sustain what's called the central dense overcast, the CDO, that circle of thunderstorm activity around the center. Does that outflow continue? If so, we'll be well on our way to Ian becoming a hurricane, which is the expectation going forward. Now, something of note, I think, in this latest update from the Hurricane Center, the 8 o'clock update. Note the motion. Winds to the moving rather to the west-southwest at 15 miles per hour. And it's actually lost a little bit of latitude. You can see that in our past track here. It's actually dived a little bit to the south. I think that's significant. You know, we track these small changes in the motion right now, the changes that'll be fed into the models, and as they are, we get different model data. That more southerly track has produced somewhat of a shift to the north, I think, in the latest model runs. You know, these are the spaghetti plots. You see they're in pretty good agreement, with the center being more or less where it is right now, continuing on a westerly motion and then starting to turn to the north. Generally speaking, the further west it gets, the further south it is before it begins to swing to the north. As we go further in time and we look at the landfall locations in Florida, the further north that landfall would be. So there's been a pretty pronounced shift in the models as far as what they're saying for the landfall locations in the state of Florida. Most now going anywhere from Bradenton northward all the way to Apalachicola now in this latest run. And you can see the difference between the 6Z and the 12Z. Earlier this morning, there were still a number of models southward towards Charlotte Harbor, even as far south as Bonita Beach there in southern Lee County. Still, the vast majority were showing Big Bend, but you can see the 12Z that shift to the north. Now, it's important to remember, as we get closer, the model should come into line, but there's still likely to be shifts here in the next 24 to 48 hours. Yes, I'll be tracking these changes. Yes, I'll be telling you about these changes in the models, what they're saying. But this is why the Hurricane Center gives their forecast in a cone. It opens up the realm of possibility that there's going to be error in the forecast. We don't forecast as a center line for the path because that's not really useful. Instead, the Hurricane Center goes back every year before every hurricane season. They go through all of their forecasts over the last 5 seasons, and they figure out what the average forecast error is so that they can figure out this cone and fit it to their forecast to encompass where 2/3 of the storms will track all the time to show that forecast error. So, yeah, you look at where we are, 2 a.m. on Wednesday. We have a Category 3 hurricane per the National Hurricane Center. Anywhere from the eastern side of the cone, which is all the way still into mainland Monroe County to the Keys, or perhaps even further out into the Gulf of Mexico. There's still quite of uncertainty as you go out in time, and you have to remember that. It's very simple. If you're in the cone, you should prepare for a potential landfalling major hurricane as we get into the middle of next week. Prepare for impacts that we'll discuss here at length. Now, this is going to turn to the north. There's sort of no question there at this point. The steering high pressure ridge is backing off into the Atlantic, and there's this little upper level low that has settled in over top of this. You're looking at vorticity, a sort of spin in the atmosphere. It's that area near Cuba that sort of cuts out almost like an S shape. That little dip in the southern branch of the jet stream, the little upper level low, is going to give this that start to kick to the north, to start to work its way northward. And then as it continues to turn to the north, I like to think of these just as sort of think of a ball going down a stream. If nothing else acts on it, it's just going to keep going in that same direction it starts in. But if something does grab it and move it the other way, that's when it's going to start to move. So this is the European forecast model, and it continues on that northwesterly track until it gets to about the western end of Cuba and towards the Keys. Then it's going to feel what's going on in the northeast, which is this diving trough, this big old dip in the jet stream that's going to grab the center of it and begin to turn it more to the north, and it's going to feel the pull of that. So the question is, as far as landfall is concerned, exactly where is the storm when it begins to be lifted to the north and east, because that will determine exactly where it makes landfall. The European, as we'll go through in just a moment here, shows the center coming in much closer to southwest Florida because of a stronger trough, because of a quicker turn to the north, whereas the GFS forecast model has that trough a little bit weaker, it has the turn occurring a little bit later, and it shows the storm going, well, in this latest run, much further out into the Gulf of Mexico, eventually feeling that tug of the trough and moving in near Apalachicola or the Big Bend. So again, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty in that forecast. What is fairly certain at this point in time is that Ian is going to gain strength. As we talked about, you're seeing that upper level outflow, a sign that this is starting to get its act together, stack itself vertically. It's getting away from the wind shear that has been hindering it over the last couple of days. You see where the red is, that's that northeasterly wind shear it's been dealing with. It's going to move into a pocket where there's basically no wind shear whatsoever as it moves south of Jamaica. And along with that, you see how the model plots track this, right on over that very deep warm water. That's going to be rocket fuel for this system. It's going to allow it to really gain strength very, very quickly. So every model you look at basically, and this was the 6Z runs, just about every model you look at shows fairly rapid intensification with this, all the way up to category 3 by 72 hours. By the time we get to Monday, and this is crossing out of the Caribbean on towards the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, we're likely talking a major hurricane, exactly what the Hurricane Center has in their cone forecast. There you go. By Monday into Tuesday, crossing Cuba, 2 a.m. Tuesday, so late Monday night, early Tuesday morning, a high-end category 2 hurricane. And then from there, like I said, tracking its way toward the coast of Florida as in all indications, major hurricane. It's important to remember, too, models over the years have gotten very, very accurate in depicting path forecasts. We have a high level of accuracy in the path forecast for hurricanes. There's still something left to be desired in intensity forecasts, in particular, models picking up on the process of rapid intensification that we've seen over the last couple of years. So that's something we're going to be watching for closely here. When you see the Hurricane Center already putting out this far out a Category 3 hurricane, you know they're looking at those indicators that say this thing could ramp up in intensity fairly quickly. So we basically have the two main global models, the European and the GFS, putting out what I think are the two most likely scenarios here in Southwest Florida for impacts. And from here on out in this video, I'm going to focus in on Southwest Florida, coming to you from Fort Myers, and the impacts that could occur here from that. Generally speaking, you know, when you talk about a hurricane and you see those, like you saw in the Cone of Concern forecast, those wind forecasts, 115 miles per hour, a hurricane sets up that those winds are going to be confined fairly close to the center in what's called the eye wall. So in this case, we are going to have to closely track where that core, where that goes. And this is going to be a large storm when all is said and done, and impacts are going to go far out from the center as far as rainfall, as far as the winds. But those very, very strong winds and all of the impacts that go with it, those 115 major hurricane winds, those will be confined close to the core. So, in this case, the European forecast model brings that core right in through southwest Florida. The GFS, or American forecast model, keeps this further out in the Gulf of Mexico, and again, like I said, an eventual landfall near Apalachicola. Note too, the GFS forecast model is a stronger storm moving through the Gulf at this point in time. So that European forecast model has been fairly consistent in the last run. I'm showing you the 0Z run, so the one that came in early this morning, and then going back to yesterday afternoon. We're going to get a new update this afternoon. I'll be very interested to see, is the European starting to give in to what those other hurricane models are saying too, with that more southern positioning? Is it starting to swing more north, or does it hold serve? Because it has been fairly consistent over the last 24 hours in showing this direct impact to southwest Florida, which again, we're in the cone. Very much in the realm of possibility still here this morning. So what would that look at? I'm going to dive into the numbers now, and as we look at these numbers, I just want to reiterate, not a forecast. It's simply model output, what one potential scenario could be. And I'm showing these numbers because I want you to wrap your head around what we could be dealing with if this does head our way here in southwest Florida. So here you go, the European forecast model. This is actually a outdated run. Let me go ahead and fix that back to 0Z. There you go. If a storm were to, major hurricane were to make landfall, these are the peak wind gusts you could expect. And if you were here 5 years ago for Hurricane Irma, you know that as Irma came in, these were more or less some of the wind gusts we saw, focused further southward, as that's where the storm came in. But yeah, 100 plus mile per hour winds, absolutely. Think back to Irma, we had a 142 mile per hour wind gusts in the Naples area. So these definitely aren't out of the question. Just about everybody in this scenario would see hurricane force winds across southwest Florida. There'd be a fairly large hurricane force wind field with this storm in all likelihood as well. And of course, it would be a prolific rainmaker. You get into the core of a hurricane, you have that rain just wrapping around the center, training in those rain bands, and you put down some significant rain totals. We'd be talking 6 to 12 inches of rain in many locations, perhaps higher amounts, locally higher amounts, almost certainly higher amounts. Inland areas, a little bit less, but there'd be widespread flooding in all likelihood across the area from the rainfall. And then we'd have to talk about storm surge. You know, as we do our hurricane preps, our hurricane specials each and every year, we talk about what a worst case scenario storm surge would be. And storm surge is when the very low pressure from the hurricane and the strong winds around the hurricane and the wide wind field around the hurricane take the waters from the ocean, in our case the Gulf of Mexico, and push them onshore. It is literally the ocean coming onshore. And what you look for is the area of onshore winds. And when we, again, make our sort of hurricane specials each year, we talk about what would be the worst case scenario for storm surge in southwest Florida. And what we typically say is a slow-moving major hurricane making landfall in around Sarasota, as that would put us for hours and hours on end in the area of onshore winds that would produce a storm surge. Here we go. By 12 o'clock on Wednesday, we have onshore winds, steady and strong hurricane force onshore winds into Collier County. Again, it's the model. It's the model forecast, not exactly what we're expecting at this point in time, but that would be a significant storm surge already building in Collier County. Then the center works northward up Charlotte Harbor. Now you have your onshore winds into Lee County. Now the waters are rising for Sanibel, for Captiva, and onward as the storm spreads northward. So in this case, a landfall over or north of southwest Florida, especially if it goes into Charlotte County or Sarasota County, now we're talking a near worst case scenario storm surge, an event that we haven't seen in quite a while, to say the least, in southwest Florida. An event in which that's where we have the storm surge maps, the storm surge zones put out for a scenario here like this. Now, again, that's just one model. And the American or GFS model is putting out a very different solution here this morning. It's been very consistent in its latest 3 model runs, all showing a storm tracking through the eastern Gulf of Mexico, but staying well off to the west of southwest Florida. And again, when you talk about a hurricane, the worst of the winds end up being around the center. So in that scenario, the hurricane force winds, especially the major hurricane force winds, would stay offshore of Southwest Florida. We'd still be talking gusts, tropical storm force, 40 plus miles per hour. I could still in the scenario see hurricane force gusts close to the coast. Could still see power outages close to the coast, but inland winds would be weaker and the winds would be much weaker overall. This would still be a significant rain event for Southwest Florida. I think that's key. At this point, it's more or less locked in that we are going to see impacts from this storm one way or another. Even a storm that tracks offshore, like the GFS shows, would still bring abroad 2 to 6 inches of rain, would still likely cause flooding. Along with that, in the rain bands that would swirl in, there would be inherent rotation, and we'd likely be talking the threat for tornadoes as well. And there would still be the threat for storm surge, too. There would still be prolonged onshore winds as that would pass by out of the south and southwest. Especially at high tide, we would see water level rises that would cause coastal flooding in all likelihood, if not a certainty. So I think at this point, it is very safe to say direct impacts more or less locked in. We are going to see impacts from this storm here in Southwest Florida. There has been a little bit of a shift in the timing. We're talking more Wednesday now. The storm has slowed down a little bit. Wednesday is when the worst conditions will arrive for Southwest Florida, which means we still have plenty of time. The key is to not panic, to keep your calm, and to prepare. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. We should prepare as if a major hurricane is working towards Southwest Florida, could make landfall in Southwest Florida. Today, be sure your hurricane plan is ready to go. Be sure that if we get to Tuesday and we know that a major hurricane is coming right at us, that you don't have to make those decisions in the moment, that you already have those decisions in place and ready to go. Make sure your hurricane kit is stocked up and ready to go here too. Sunday, Monday, especially as we track this forecast for you, that's the time to start to prepare your home. The key is to be in place, in your safe place by Tuesday with 24 hours plus for any impacts begin, to be in your safe place to ride out the storm. We're going to be here for you 24/7, tracking Ian around the clock, so be sure you're staying with us for updates on air and online. In fact, we'll be back with the 11 o'clock update on air. Meteorologist Jesslyn Ferenc will bring that to you live on ABC 7, so be sure you tune in for that, and I'll be back with another edition of Tropics Talk for you tomorrow morning. Till then, I'm meteorologist Jim Dickey. Stay safe out there.